This is Deep into History, and I'm your host, Arjun Hundo. In a few moments, we'll be transported to a point in time that Macers and commoners alike point to as the cause of the momentous events in our tale to be. It is so very often the case that to simplify things in our minds, we tend to narrow down the multitude of root causes to a single instant. The fact is that it is never that simple. So, in an effort to give you the full scope of the situation and a general understanding of the state of mind of many of our supporting cast, if you will, we'll witness this event through the eyes of someone skilled at being, let's say, a watcher. Someone whose vocation, if not their calling, forced him to become an excellent observer and predictor of people's actions. Through the eyes of a prince who, for the sake of his beloved niece, and by merit of his incredible skill at arms, became a knight of the King's Guard, Prince Lewin Martell of Dorne. Thus the setup to our setup goes like this. It is the year of the fall spring, 4 years after the defiance of Duskendale, where the king had been made hostage and abused. After a daring rescue by Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard, Duskendale was brought low, its noble houses decimated. Since that event, the king, for years seemingly on the brink of madness, has been pushed completely over the edge. He spent the last 4 years dwelling exclusively in the Red Keep, refusing to leave. His paranoia has grown to the point where he's suspicious of all but a few of his most fawning sycophants. He hasn't allowed himself to be groomed and rarely bathes. No one but the King's Guard are allowed to come near him with blades, to the extent that his nails are long twisted claws, and his hair and beard oily, stained, stinking, and tangled. Beyond rumors, most of his subjects have no idea of how badly his mental state has deteriorated. And while the population has generally accepted that every Targaryen monarch's sanity is in essence as random as a flip of a gold dragon or silver stag, no monarch, with the possible exception of Aegon the Unworthy in the last days of his life, has approached the level of utter insanity of King Aerys, the second of his name. It is the year 281 after the conquest, and Lord Walter Went is holding the largest tournament in many years in honor of his daughter's name day. The truly spectacular size of the purses for the victors has drawn knights from across the realm. The prizes are so rich that great lords and lords paramount are drawn to the fire-melted ruins of Heron the Black's Folly, the largest castle that was ever built in Westeros. From the north to Dorne, the Stormlands to the Iron Islands, the Vale of Arryn to the Reach, knights have come to show their prowess before the entire realm. The decrepit king himself is in attendance, drawn from his isolation in King's Landing by whispers about whispers of treachery. The realm thrives, but the king and his counselors are a black virus spreading ill will and suspicion. They taint what should be a compliment to the competency of his rule, or at least the rule of his former hand, Tywin of House Lannister, Warden of the West. For beyond the glorious decorations, pavilions, banners, and opulent tents, there is an undercurrent of tension. Whispers that there was no way Lord Went could afford to offer such lavish prizes. Whispers that he must have a backer, someone who needed to bring the great lords of the realm together for some reason. Whispers of plots within plots. It is the fifth and final day of the joust, the final tilt between Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone, and Sir Barristan Selmy, Knight of the Kingsguard, considered to be the greatest lance in the realm. So come dream with me as we take a trip back to the tourney at Harrenhal and experience the moment when all the smiles died. Ready? Then let's go. You are standing on the wooden viewing gallery to witness the joust on the vast plain immediately before the monstrously large castle and ruin of Harrenhal. All around you are festive noises, excited chatting, laughter, flirtation, and camaraderie. Standing there, in the midst of it all, you feel something that you have never truly felt before. You feel that though everyone around you is from every corner of the realm, you are all one people. You feel Westerosi. A welcome relief from the tension and suspicion that has hung like a dark cloud over the festivities. And as you see Prince Rhaegar in his black and ruby-covered armor appear on his destrier, that wonderful sense of unity evaporates. Being his wife's uncle and his friend, you are one of the few that he trusted enough to bring into his conspiracy. Though you are of Dorne, a prince of Dorne, where politics are more venomous than the bite of the deadliest sand snake, you have never enjoyed court intrigue. In fact, it was a huge relief when you first took your vows as a knight of the Kingsguard, so you could spend your days protecting your beloved niece and her new family, and your nights with your paramour at the manse you bought for her in King's Landing. As Rhaegar's squire passes him his helmet, and the prince places it over his head, covering his mane of silver Valyrian hair, the last vestiges of that glorious feeling you had only moments ago leaves you, replaced by the all too familiar fear, suspicion, paranoia. You sigh, and through sheer force of will, answer those emotions with devotion, confidence, and love. For you are Prince Lewin Martell of Dorne, sworn brother of the Kingsguard, and you learned to master your emotions long ago. Seated before you is your niece, Elia, Princess of the Realm, wife to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. She's already delivered him a daughter, Rhaenys, a beautiful child, and is even now pregnant with what all hoped would be a son, thus securing the succession. She is more to you than that, though. She is the princess of your heart, who you have loved like a daughter since you first held her in your arms so many years ago. Next to her is her brother, your nephew, and the sight of him brings a smile to your lips. You remember just nights ago at the celebratory ball in the castle where he danced with the Lady Ashara Dane of Starfall, and continually made playful smirks at Sir Barristan Selmy over her shoulder, while the most puissant warrior in the Seven Kingdoms' cold stare in reply continually shot daggers at the prince. He was arrogant and wild. Though you quietly admonished him afterwards, you loved Oberyn because you were the same at his age. You understood. Princes of Dorne were men apart. Still, you privately wished he had had the sense to court the enchanting young lady with the laughing purple eyes, instead of wasting his chance by spending their dance provoking your sworn brother. As if in answer to your thoughts, Sir Barristan Selmy enters the list on the opposite side of the field and takes his lane. Majestic in the gleaming white enameled scale and silver plate Kingsguard armor you both wear. His white cloak billows out behind him on the wind, and he is met by a roaring cheer from the crowd. All around you are seated the nobles of Westeros, the Baratheons, the Starks, lords of Mountain and Vale, with the River Lords seated further away in places of honor near the host of the tournament, Lord Went, who sat with the king's party. Across the jousting grounds, thousands of commoners are waiting for the main event. Some had gathered before dawn to secure coveted seats on the wooden tourney stands, with long benches newly erected just for the tournament. Others are clustered in their hundreds in the roped-off standing areas. Your eyes are again drawn to Sir Barristan as his squire hands him his white helmet, and you are suddenly filled with guilt because you have been forced to keep things from your sworn brother. You had given Rhaegar your word to keep his plans hidden, and though you disliked plots, you did it for Elia. For you know this grandest of tournaments is a facade. All the beautiful ladies and lords, great and small, the celebrations, the splendor, and half the chivalry of Westeros brought together here for a hidden purpose. The plan had been to gather as many great lords as possible together, and in secret, masked by the celebrations, hold an informal great council. Prince Rhaegar wanted to make his case to them about the king's vastly deteriorated mental state, his paranoia, his cruelty, and his madness. With their support, along with that of the bulk of the Kingsguard, he planned to execute a bloodless coup, remove the king's authority, and with the unified might of most of the lords of Westeros, neutralize the mad king's sycophantic supporters. It wasn't a bad plan, you think, but it had gone awry. Two things had gone terribly wrong. First, the king had decided to leave his voluntary seclusion in the Red Keep for the first time in years and attend the tourney himself. Second, in a fit of spite and madness, the king had ordered that Jaime Lannister of Casterly Rock and Lord Tywin's heir be named to the Kingsguard, at once an honor and a tremendous insult to his once dearest friend. This had kept the former hand of the king and the richest man in the Seven Kingdoms away. A man whose support Rhaegar desperately needed if there was to be any hope of success. Now, instead, the tournament is filled with members of the royal court, listening to every conversation, watching everyone, seeking the slightest bit of information so that they could whisper it into the king's ear and receive his largesse. Also, you have no doubt that the king's lord of whispers, the eunuch Varys, had dozens, if not hundreds, of his little birds scattered inside and on the grounds of the castle. There was hope, though. You would notice the shock and revulsion that the gathered lords of Westeros could not help but experience when they saw their king's hideous appearance. In addition to the king's insane mood swings, now laughing, then crying, smiling one second, and a growling frown the next, his condition had been noted, and you have no doubt that it worried all who had the displeasure of speaking with him. Though you hadn't dared discuss it, you think this is why Rhaegar had decided to join the list. By showing his prowess and elegance in the joust, and his grace and eloquence at the dance, it provided a massive contrast to the father. Sane and noble Rhaegar versus the Mad King. If he wins the day, you think, it will send a message of its own. He will win them over in their hearts, if not yet their minds, without ever saying a word. A hush settles over the crowd as Lord Went stands and loudly proclaims, "Begin!" The jousters lower their lances and begin their charge. Your seasoned eyes see that both riders' form is excellent, though Sir Barristan looks far more comfortable in his seat, almost becoming one with his charger. He is truly poetry in motion. Rhaegar leans forward in his seat, tense and focused, with the effect of his black and red armor, his red cloak spread out like wings on the wind. For the barest hint of an instant, he looks like the closest thing you will ever see to a dragon taking flight. The pounding hooves and the heavy breathing of the horses grows ever louder as the jousters near the center of the list, and then, crack! Rhaegar's lance takes Sir Barristan full in the chest, with the Kingsguard only making a glancing blow off Rhaegar's shoulder pauldron. Rhaegar's lance doesn't burst into splinters. Instead, it acts like a wall, and Sir Barristan is pushed off his stallion, which continues its mad dash down the field without its rider. Nobles and commoners alike roar their approval and applaud their prince. Even the old men and women are on their feet cheering. He did it, you think. He has them in the palm of his hand. You smile and beam with pride at Elia, who's looking at you with a shy and knowing smile of her own. Her delicate beauty enhances and serves to magnify Rhaegar's triumph. Oberyn is on his feet cheering and boisterously yelling at the nobles who he placed wagers with to bring forth their coin. You look to the field and are glad to see Sir Barristan with his helmet off, smiling as he is being helped to his feet by two squires, appearing no worse for wear, and though defeated, he looks genuinely to have enjoyed the tilt. Your sworn brother is nothing if not gallant. Prince Rhaegar, still mounted, lowers his lance to receive a crown of rare blue winter roses. A strange choice. The cost of a single winter rose this far south would be high. This blue crown would have cost many gold dragons. A needless extravagance, especially when any other type of common flower would not serve to diminish the honor in the least. He turns his charger and makes his way in a gentle trot down the wooden gallery, past many noble ladies who are blushing and fanning themselves with their hands. Elia leans forward ever so slightly as he approaches, ready to receive her husband's gift and be named Queen of Love and Beauty. Yet without a glance at her, he trots his horse past a few dozen paces and places the blue rose crown in the lap of Lady Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. In that instant, the cheers, the laughter, the sense of camaraderie disappear as if they never existed. In the stunned silence, smiles disappear, and many turn to frowns. You see the lady's older brother, Brandon, glare at the prince, but are distracted by Oberyn, who spits on the ground and is about to rise in anger, when you drop your white lobster steel hand heavily on his shoulder, keeping him seated in his place. Then it's as if your nephew's red-hot anger flows up your arm and becomes a white-hot flame at the center of your being. You are filled with a level of anger you did not know you possessed at the insult to your beloved Elia, given before the entire realm. You remove your hand and take a breath. The flame inside you dies, and you are a Kingsguard again. A disappointed and heartbroken Kingsguard, for you'd come to love Rhaegar as a member of your family. But after this insult to Elia, you know you will never love him again. Elia, too refined and cultured to create a scene, stares straight ahead. You can't even bring yourself to look at the prince. He had them. They would have followed him anywhere, you think. Now he has insulted 3 great houses, and for what? The Starks, Martells, and the lady's betrothed, Robert Baratheon, a cousin, a natural ally. Rhaegar just undid months of planning, countless hours of whispered plotting, and before you raise your eyes to witness their reaction, you can't help but whisper, why? Leave the oppressive silence behind. Allow the tension of that moment to pass. Let the tourney at Harrenhal simply fade away. Come back to deep into history and hear me say, this is the tale of 7 kingdoms forged into one with fire and blood, torn asunder by civil war. The tale of a prince, a married man, who became obsessed with a young maiden from the north, an obsession that would lead to the ruin of his house. The saga of the rise of the warrior king of Westeros and the fall of a dynasty. The saga of 2 houses that should have stood shoulder to shoulder as brothers, and 2 cousins who should have been the greatest of allies, forced to become the bitterest enemies by the actions of a mad king. The tale of a bond of love between 2 friends and the man who raised them. The epic tale of Robert's rebellion, and how he became known as the demon of the Trident. So take a deep breath, let it out slowly, put some smoke in the air if you choose, and just let your mind flow to my voice as we go deep into the year 283 after the conquest and witness the Battle of the Trident. Welcome to the Stag and the Dragon. To understand the events in Westeros in the years 282 to 283 after the conquest, I'll need to deliver one of my classic deep into history historical nutshells. For hundreds of years since Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya, riding their 3 mighty dragons, forged 7 feuding kingdoms into one with waves of fire and oceans of blood, House Targaryen has ruled supreme. Some kings ruled justly, others poorly, and still others brought the realm war. As the decades passed, their dragons died. Some killed in battle, some of old age, and the last of them as malformed hatchlings. Without their dragons, the Targaryens were diminished, many driven to madness by their absence, plagued by longing and dreams of the lost bond between dragon and Targaryen. To give you an idea of the geography of the continent, I'll start in the north and move clockwise. In addition, I'll name the ruling family, their seat or capital of each region, and the words of their house. So, the north, ruled by House Stark, from their castle Winterfell. Their words, winter is coming. The Vale of Arryn, ruled by House Arryn, from the lofty heights of the Eyrie. Their words, as high as honor. The Riverlands, ruled by House Tully, from the tranquil castle Riverrun. Their words, family, duty, honor. The Crownlands, ruled by House Targaryen, from the realm's capital city, King's Landing. Their words, fire and blood. The Stormlands, ruled by House Baratheon, from the impregnable fortress Storm's End. Their words, ours is the fury. Dorne, ruled by House Martell, from their seat in hot and spicy Sunspear, the most southern region. Their words, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Moving up the west coast now, the Reach, ruled by House Tyrell, from their beautiful castle, Highgarden. Their words, growing strong. The Westerlands, ruled by House Lannister, from mighty Casterly Rock. Their words, hear me roar. And finally, the Iron Islands, ruled by House Greyjoy, from the damp and dreary Castle Pike. Their words, we do not sow. All of the families mentioned are lords paramount, and they have many greater and lesser lords sworn to obey them in their lands. All answer to the Iron Throne in the Red Keep at King's Landing and House Targaryen. In the year 262 after the conquest, Aerys Targaryen ascends to the throne. Crowned Aerys, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Defender of the Realm. The people of Westeros are full of hope for their new king, as he boasts of grand projects such as building a colossal aqueduct from the wet Stormlands under and through the mountains of Dorne, so that the deserts of that parched land could bloom. Though most of his projects never get past the early planning phases, the people seem to love the wild aspirations of their new king. In perhaps his wisest decision, he appoints an old friend, Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, to be his hand, in essence, the realm's chief administrator, who spoke with the king's voice and carried out his will. Through his tireless work and effort, the realm thrives under the new hand. Its people prosper and trade flourishes. While the king womanized and feasted, Lord Tywin ruled harshly but fairly. His acerbic manner and judgments that brook no appeal caused many lords to dislike him. As the years passed, people whispered that it was Lord Tywin who was the true ruler of Westeros, and these whispers reached the jealous king's ears. And because of this, the king begins to take liberties and insults and embarrasses Lord Tywin whenever he can. What made this worse was that the king began to show signs of the dreaded Targaryen madness. After his heir, Prince Rhaegar, is born, Queen Rhaella has a series of 4 miscarriages, worsening the king's paranoia. Still, outside of the Red Keep in King's Landing, the realm prospers. Until, that is, a rebellion by the port city of Duskendale, where the king is taken hostage and possibly tortured and abused. Though he is rescued and the traitors are vanquished, his descent into madness greatly accelerates. The king's paranoia consumes him as he surrounds himself with sycophantic lords who whisper of plots and non-existent treasons. The king shuns bathing, shaving, and allows his nails to grow into long, hideous claws. Ever jealous and suspicious of his hand, Lord Tywin, in 281 AC, he appoints the hand's son and heir, Sir Jaime Lannister, to the Kingsguard as a way of showing his old friend, with whom the true power in the realm lay. This action made Sir Jaime the youngest member in the history of that storied brotherhood. It was at once an immense honor and a very personal insult to his once greatest ally and friend. This action is the final straw. Lord Tywin resigns his position as Hand of the King and returns to his ancestral seat at Casterly Rock in the Westerlands. After the events we witnessed at the tourney of Harrenhal in that same year, the year of the fall spring, a harsh and severe winter returns to the land. Yet a few months later, the ice begins to thaw, the snows begin to melt, and the rivers begin to swell as hope of new life returns to the land. At River Run, in the Riverlands, Hoster Tully is preparing to host a joyous celebration for the fast-approaching wedding between his daughter Catelyn and the heir to Winterfell and the North, Brandon Stark. The union of 2 great houses would require hosting dozens of lesser lords and their entourages, a burden to be sure, especially after the recent strange turning of the seasons, but one borne happily. In fact, Brandon Stark had arrived with his sister Lyanna and some noble companions to get to know his bride-to-be. The exact details of what happened next are unclear. Many different versions and theories have come down to us, so I'll stick to the facts that we do know. Brandon and his companions left the castle and rode north from Riverrun to meet and escort his father, Lord Rickard Stark, Warden of the North, and his large noble entourage on the last leg of their journey south. Lyanna Stark appears to have stayed behind at Riverrun. What we know of the maiden, who Rhaegar crowned Queen of Love and Beauty at Harrenhal, is that she was as wild and untamed as the North itself. A gifted equestrian, she loved to ride and explore. The prospect of new lands must have excited her greatly, and she rode deep into the Riverlands. On one of her long rides, she encountered Prince Rhaegar and some of his companions, including at least one Kingsguard knight, Sir Arthur Dayne. According to history as it is written, Rhaegar kidnapped the young lady, and with the help of his companions rode south and for all intents and purposes disappeared. To the north, before he had met his father's party, news of the kidnapping had somehow reached Brandon Stark's ears. Brandon was a hot-headed youth. He had the wolf's blood, as they say in the north, and was prone to rash action. Instead of rushing to inform his father, he rode straight for King's Landing with his small group of noble companions, including Albert Arryn, the heir to the Vale. Upon entering the city, they rode straight to the Red Keep, and in the courtyard, Brandon Stark yelled a challenge to Prince Rhaegar, who was not there, to come out, face him, and die. Instead, they were surrounded by guards, and by order of the Mad King, arrested for plotting the murder of the prince. When Lord Rickard Stark heard what his son had done, he went straight to the Red Keep with 200 companions who had ridden south with him to attend the wedding. He went in good faith to plead his son's case, Yet instead, all were sentenced to death by the Mad King. As was his right, Lord Stark demanded trial by combat. The atrocity that happened next gives us a glimpse into the sick mind of the Mad King. For the king declared that fire was the champion of House Targaryen. So he had the Lord of the North suspended above a fire built in the throne room. Steps away, Brandon Stark was put in a cruel noose with a sword placed just out of his reach. In an effort to save his father from burning, Brandon reached for the sword to cut him free. But by this action, the noose tightened. There, before the cackling Mad King in the royal court, the Lord of Winterfell burned while his son suffocated to death. And with the exception of one boy from the north, all who had gone to seek justice had died at the Mad King's command. Knowing that he had just killed many lords, nobles, and heirs, the Mad King sent a raven to the Eyrie in the Vale. There, Jon Arryn, Warden of the West, had fostered 2 wards for years: Eddard Stark, the second son of Lord Rickard, and Robert Baratheon, the young lord of Storm's End. The letter he received ordered him to kill his wards and bring their heads to the Red Keep to prove his loyalty. Jon Arryn had no children and had come to love his wards as sons. In addition, his named heir had been killed at the Red Keep. So instead, he decided he had had enough of this madman who called himself a king and called his banners. This was a call to war, and after the ravens flew from the Eyrie to all the great houses of the Vale and beyond, the rebellion can truly be said to have begun. Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, was a giant young man, 6.5 feet tall and heavily muscled. He was boisterous, loved to laugh, loved women and wine. He was brave and powerful, and while not a noted jouster, at tourneys he excelled at the melee. He was an exceptional warrior who fought in heavy plate armor, with his ancestral antlered helm adding to his height. He fought with a heavy warhammer that lesser men could barely lift, and was an awesome presence on any battlefield. His parents had died in a freak storm within sight of their castle. Robert and his brother Stannis witnessed the shipwreck from the walls of Storm's End. They also had a younger brother, Renly, too young to take part in the deeds that are spoken of in this tale. After his parents' death, he, the very young Robert, became Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. In order for him to learn to rule, he was sent to the Vale to be taught by Jon Arryn, Warden of the West. Eddard Stark, the second son of Lord Rickard, had joined Robert in the Vale as another ward. They had spent years together, learning, training, and just being boys with the young nobles of the Vale of Arryn. A deep bond of affection had grown between the 2 wards, and they considered themselves brothers. Eddard, however, was very different from the loud and charismatic Robert. He was stoic, careful, and considerate, not quick to laugh, nor quick to anger. He thought and felt things deeply. When the terrible news reached the Eyrie of the murders in the Red Keep, the second son, who had never thought to rule, suddenly found himself the new Lord of Winterfell, head of House Stark, and Lord Paramount of the North. The newly minted rebels formulated a plan. Eddard Stark would ride through the mountains to the north coast of the Vale, and there take ship to the north and call his banners, raising his army, and then make for the Riverlands. Next, Robert Baratheon would take ship from Gulltown and make the long sea voyage to Storm's End and call his banners, mobilizing the army of the Stormlands, while Jon Arryn gathered the Knights of the Vale and made the march through the Mountains of the Moon to the Riverlands, where he would treat with Hoster Tully at Riverrun in the hopes of gaining another ally in their fight. There was one major problem with this plan. Some of the lords of the Vale decided not to answer the liege lord's call to arms and decided to remain loyal to the crown. Chief among them were the Graftons of Gulltown, lords of the Vale's only major port, with ships large enough to safely make the journey to the Stormlands. Civil war erupted in the Vale. Since it would take some time for Eddard Stark to reach the north, he was dispatched on his way as planned. Lord Arryn gathered the houses loyal to him, including the mighty warriors of House Royce of Runestone, and marched to show the Lord of Gulltown to whom he owed his allegiance, Robert Baratheon at his side. It should be noted that though word of the rebellion had spread throughout the 7 kingdoms, no aid came to Gulltown from King's Landing. Once outside the gates of the bustling port city, Jon Arryn ordered an assault on the walls. Time was precious to the rebels, and a siege would have been impractical as the town could be resupplied by sea. The first man up the siege ladders and on the walls was Robert Baratheon. He proved to be a peerless warrior, vanquishing all who dared to face his mighty warhammer. He is said to have laughed as he fought, and the Vale men said afterwards that it was like fighting with the Laughing Storm reborn, Robert's illustrious ancestor and one of House Baratheon's most famous warriors. Now, we aren't told what it was like seeing the Laughing Storm reborn in his first glorious battle, but it might have gone something like this. You were standing with an honor guard of your household knights before the walls of Gulltown. Minutes before, your liege lord, John Arryn, warden of the West and defender of the Vale, had ordered the stormings of the walls to begin. As the young lord of Runestone, you had taken your rightful place, commanding the lord of the Erie's right wing. Unfortunately for you, that meant seeing to the disposition of your men from the rear, not storming the walls with your friend who had insisted on leading the first wave of knights in the assault. Your fool of a friend, Robert Baratheon, Lord of the Stormlands. But he's more to you than that. You've known each other for years. You've trained, hunted, and sparred together countless times. And though you are closer to Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon is one of your dearest friends, a brother, who is even now the first man up the siege ladder on the walls in front of you. Fool, you think. Brave fool. He was in the most dangerous position on the battlefield by choice. You know him. You know he feels guilty, as if any of this is his fault. After the infamy at the Red Keep, killing the heir to the Vale, the Starks, one of your kinsmen, and the mass executions of so many, then to send for the heads of your two friends to test the Vale's loyalty? To question our honor? He truly is a mad king. Rebellion was a justified response. Robert Baratheon had nothing to do with anything at the Red Keep. He is kin to the king, his grandmother, a Targaryen princess. The founder of his line, Orys Baratheon, was Aegon the Conqueror's bastard brother by the old gods. Baratheon and Targaryens were kin. Ordering his death is kinslaying in your mind, and you are Jon Royce, and you'll have no truck with kinslayers. My lord, look, a knight in your honor guard says, pointing at the top of the walls. You are met with a sight out of the Age of Heroes. Robert Baratheon is alone atop the city wall, battling groups of Grafton knights. It should be impossible, but he is faster with that bloody heavy warhammer of his than most men are with their swords. Night after night falls, and the ones who think to attack him from behind are quickly met by the whirling Lord of Storm's End. With his antlered helm, he looks like a mighty dancing stag, a demonic stag, light on his feet in his heavy armor, kicking with his armored boots, punching with his armored fists, crushing men like insects with his warhammer, and you swear by the old gods that he is smiling. Damn the man, he is enjoying himself. He fights like, the knight to your right says, and you finish for him, the Laughing Storm reborn. Ever more defenders are rushing to meet him. Too many, even for him. You turn and yell an order to the 4 sharpshooters you had retained from Longbow Hall. Don't just stand there. Cover him, pointing at Robert. The elite archers rush forward 20 yards and begin firing at the defenders attempting to swarm Robert. Their phenomenal accuracy proves deadly and defenders fall. It is just enough to relieve the pressure and allow a few more knights of the Vale to ascend the ladder and gain the walls to fight beside him. In that instant, Robert turns, looks directly at you, smiles, lifts his warhammer over his head, and yells, "Ours is the fury!" And as the sound of his mighty battle cry reaches your ears, it is as if Robert Baratheon's aura has spread across the battlefield, inspiring endurance and devotion, and vanquishing fear. Impossibly, you can feel the ancient runes on your bronze armor activate for the first time in your life. And responsibility of command or not, you can wait no longer. You nod to your honor guard, draw your sword, and yell back to Robert, "We remember!" In answer, your knights rhythmically chant, "Runestone, Runestone, Runestone." For what you just witnessed and felt is all the confirmation you need. Robert Baratheon marks the return of the Age of Heroes. You decide, for good or ill, to glory or ruin, House Royce will fight at this hero's side. You charge and yell, "We remember, Robert!" At least it might have gone like that. At the battle on the walls of Gulltown, Robert slew Mark Grafton in single combat, And with that, the royalists lost their spirit, surrendered, and afterward reaffirmed their allegiance to their liege lord, John Arryn. As soon as the port was secured, Robert Baratheon took ship and set off on the voyage south to the Stormlands. A voyage made perilous by the fact that his ship would have to pass through waters patrolled by the royal fleet. As Lord John Arryn moved back through the Vale, he gathered ever more forces for the long march to the Riverlands. In the meantime, Lord Stark reached White Harbor in the north, only after surviving a vicious storm where he and a fisherman's daughter were the only survivors of a shipwreck. He, no doubt, had Lord Manderley of White Harbor send out ravens to the lords of the north, calling the banners, telling them to muster their forces at Winterfell, before he made his way to what was now his castle. Many northern nobles had died in the Mad King's infamous executions. Thus, the houses of the north were eager to fight. Unfortunately, given the sheer vastness of the frozen north, this took time. Eddard waited as long as he dared, and with his army of savage Northmen, began the very long march south to his rendezvous with the Knights of the Vale at River Run. During all this time, the crown had not been idle, though it appears they did not appreciate the severity of the rebellion. From the Red Keep, the ravens flew, all across the Seven Kingdoms, commanding all loyal lords to raise troops to face the rebels. The lords of the Crown Lands responded first, and assembled a large force put under the command of the king's new and very young hand, a friend and companion of Prince Rhaegar, John Connington, the Lord of Griffin's Roost in the Stormlands, who forswore his house's allegiance to Storm's End to serve the crown. In the Reach, Lord Tyrell of Highgarden called his banners, and waited for the massive army of Westeros' most populous region to gather. Dorne was slow to respond. No doubt Prince Doran Martell, Princess Ilya's brother, was concerned for her welfare, but the insult to their house by Prince Rhaegar at Harrenhal, followed by the rejection of his lawful wife who had borne his children to kidnap Lyanna Stark, was a bitter pill, and an insult to all Dorne. In the end, he did call his banners, though he only sent what others after these events said was the bare minimum to do his duty to the throne, and those forces only appeared much later. This would prove crucial, for had the Martells marched into the Stormlands with their full strength, rumored to be 50,000 formidable spearmen, Robert may have been defeated then and there. And speaking of Robert Baratheon, the Laughing Storm Reborn reaches the Stormlands after this. You may be asking yourself, what happened at Deep into History? First, let me say Happy April Fools. Second, I wanted to introduce you to my Revisited series, where I go back to the original scripts of my earliest tales, tweak them a bit, just a bit, because I'm not trying to rewrite history as it were. But my skills and my art have come a long way since those early days. Thus I'll be performing them again and giving you the classics, remixed and remastered. The first iteration of this tale came out when Deep into History was in its infancy, my fourth release. I had barely learned the basics of recording. Yet even though I was a new podcast among hundreds of thousands of new podcasts, a nobody in this corporate industry, yet when I reached out to Yolkboy from one of my all-time favorite podcasts, The Incredible Radio Westeros, to get his expert opinion and answers to some questions I had, he not only answered and was helpful, but was so nice, encouraging, and we have since become good friends. I even had the huge honor of appearing on a Radio Westeros livestream with Yolkboy and Lady Gwennifer last year, speculating about the fate of a Knight of the Kingsguard that appears in our tale, in their wonderful Streams of Winter series. For context, if you are a Song of Ice and Fire fanatic like me, Yolkboy and Lady G are not mere rock stars, but rock gods. So definitely check out Radio Westeros. Now, back to The Stag and the Dragon. When Robert Baratheon landed at Storm's End, he found that much like in the Vale, he faced an uprising of many vassals who decided to stay loyal to the crown. He gathered what men he could, a relatively small force, as he had very little time to muster his loyal bannermen, and marched to the ruins of Summerhall, where he had been informed his disloyal vassals had planned to gather to face him. He dared not wait, for if the royalists managed to unite, he would be badly outnumbered. So he, and his army such as it was, marched. The details are few, but what we do know is this. Robert and his army reached Summerhall in the nick of time, on the very day his foes were to unite. So he fought and won 3 separate battles against the lords Granderson, Catharin, and Fell on that glorious day. Lord Fell died in battle, but his son Silveraxe and the rest submitted to Robert and swore oaths renewing their allegiance to House Baratheon. Robert laughed and embraced them as brothers, who had merely needed a good hammering to remind them who ruled the Stormlands. His unrivaled prowess on the battlefield and gentle and warm manner in victory had won them over. They would prove to be among his most loyal supporters. Still, this was only a fraction of his strength, so he had to march back to Storm's End while his bannermen gathered their forces. At this time, his allies to the north would be making for the Riverlands, and it was imperative that he unite with them, especially when the news of a large royal army assembling at King's Landing under the command of his traitorous vassal, the new hand of the king, John Connington, arrived. After many days, finally assembled, the army of the Stormlands marched. They dared not approach King's Landing and face the Crown's army, so Robert was forced to march east inland before turning north towards the Riverlands. This path took him perilously close to the reach and the might of Highgarden, which had mobilized their forces and were even now, unbeknownst to Robert, marching east directly towards him. Near the town of Ashford, the Stormlanders were ambushed by Randall Tarley, the Lord of Hornhill, who was leading the vanguard miles ahead of the advancing mighty host under the command of Mace Tyrell. Being the vanguard, Tarley's troops would have been mounted and most likely consisted of knights. Again, the details of this battle are few, but it appears Tarley ordered a charge on the rear of Robert's marching army. The Stormlanders were taken completely by surprise, and the rear of the army was devastated. Lord Tarley's maneuvers in this battle cemented his reputation as the most formidable general in the Reach, if not the entire kingdom. He slew Lord Catharin in single combat, and later sent his head to King's Landing as proof of the Reach's loyalty. However, this battle was not decisive, as the bulk of the Tyrell army did not reach the field in time, and Robert was able to retreat in good order and continue north. When Mace Tyrell did arrive, he ordered a pursuit, and the situation for Robert Baratheon became desperate. He was about to pass through lands that would have been heavily patrolled by the royal army searching for any sign of the Stormlanders. For this reason, it seems that Robert split the remnants of his army into smaller groups, hoping to avoid detection. Still, it appears that the group he led was found and he was injured by a royal patrol. His party was chased into the nearby town of Stony Sept, where the people hid him and tended his wounds while the royal army closed in and surrounded the town. As bad as this was, the situation could have been much worse had not Mace Tyrell inexplicably given up the pursuit and instead marched his army into the Stormlands to lay siege to Robert's seat at Storm's End, which was held by his younger brother Stannis with only a skeletal force to hold the immense fortress. We'll leave Robert Baratheon hidden away in some secret place in Stony Sept while we move north to the Riverlands for a moment. By this time, the armies of the North and the Vale had converged on Riverrun. Ever the diplomat, Jon Arryn convinced Lord Hoster Tully to join the rebellion, a choice made easier by the fact that the Mad King had executed nobles of the Riverlands, his vassals, at the infamy at the Red Keep. This pact was sealed when Eddard Stark married Catelyn Tully, his brother's former betrothed, and Jon Arryn married Lysa, her younger sister. With the pact sealed, Hoster Tully called his banners, and once again many houses chose to stay loyal to the crown. When news of Robert's dire predicament reached Riverrun, Eddard Stark, with his savage Northmen, along with the might of House Tully, began a desperate march to Stony Sept. Jon Arryn and the Knights of the Vale remained in the Riverlands, perhaps acting as a deterrent because in the Westerlands, Lord Tywin Lannister watched and waited, and there was no word of the intentions of House Greyjoy of the Iron Islands. If Tywin marched east with his now assembled army, only the Knights of the Vale could hope to stand against him and defend the Riverlands. It should also be noted that there was still no sign of Prince Rhaegar or Lyanna Stark at this time. At Stony Sept, the young hand of the king, John Connington, had surrounded the town with his army and flooded its cobblestone streets with troops searching house to house for Robert Baratheon. With no sign of the Lord of the Stormlands, He offered the townsfolk pardons and gold if they would betray his hiding place. When this didn't work, he hung men in cruel crow cages to starve and be exposed to the elements until they talked. Again, this didn't work, and only hardened the hearts of the people against him. The Hand ordered ever more men into the town, to the point that most of his army was now filling the streets involved in the search. Then suddenly, one morning the approach of the rebel army under the command of Stark and Tully was spotted by the townsfolk, who rang the bells of the sept as a warning for the people to stay inside their houses as danger approached. What transpired next was forever after known as the Battle of the Bells, for they never ceased ringing. The rebel host rushed into the town, and there was fierce fighting in the streets. At the height of the battle, Robert Baratheon emerged from a brothel, wielding his massive warhammer, and laid waste to the royal forces he encountered. He even fought and defeated Jon Connington, nearly killing him, though the Hand was able to escape. With no choice, he ordered a general retreat, and though much of the royal army was preserved, his losses had been heavy, and the morale of his troops was shattered. Once reunited with his dear friend Eddard Stark and his new ally Hoster Tully, they marched north to the Riverlands to unite their forces with the Knights of the Vale, the levies of House Tully, and the Storm Lords that had eluded detection. Upon his return to King's Landing, Jon Connington was stripped of his titles, lands, and sent into exile for his failure. The Mad King sent the Kingsguard Knights, Sir Barristan Selmy and Sir Jonathor Derry to Stony Sept to rally what they could of the units of the shattered royal army. In addition, a call went out to the Crown lands for fresh levies to be raised. The king then dispatched the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, on a mission to the south to find and summon Prince Rhaegar, so that he could lead the new royal army, for with the rebels united, all new battle was imminent. We do not know the precise timeline, but within a few weeks, perhaps a moon's turn, Prince Rhaegar arrived at the capital, followed by 10,000 Dornish spearmen sent by House Martell to aid the crown. It should be noted that 3 Kingsguard remained in the south, ostensibly to watch the captive Lyanna Stark in whatever prison Rhaegar had secreted her in. With the royal army assembled, Prince Rhaegar led a host of 40,000 men north to confront the rebels. A huge army, though many were fresh recruits who had never fought in combat. Now camped in the northern part of the Riverlands, the combined strength of the rebel army was 35,000. Though most of these men were by then battle-hardened warriors. The two forces came together at a ford on the River Trident. Now I could just tell you what happened at the ultimate battle of Robert's Rebellion, and I would no doubt do so ever so suavely. But this is deep into history, and you're with your friend and Lore Master Arjun, so you know you're going to experience it. Prepare to dream with me as we become one with Prince Lewin Martell of Dorne, Knight of the Kingsguard, because the events on the right flank of the Targaryen army during the Battle of the Trident in the year 283 after the conquest might have gone something like this. Ready? Then let's go. You were standing on the south bank of the River Trident. In your enameled white scale and plate armor, you gleam in the sunlight. Your white cloak hanging from your shoulders is buffeted by a gentle breeze. As you look up into the clear blue sky, the black and red Targaryen banners with the 3-headed dragon of the house ripple and flutter. Such a beautiful day. The thought disappears in a flash as your eyes are drawn to the assembled rebel host on the opposite bank of the river. You observe the banners arrayed against you, and it appears you will be fighting a mixed force of men from the Riverlands and the foot soldiers of the Lords of the Vale. You have yet to spot their fabled mounted knights, but you know they won't be far away, perhaps kept in reserve to charge a weak spot in your lines. At least that's how you would deploy them if you were in command of the rebels. You look far away towards the center of the enemy line, hoping to catch a glimpse of the antlered helm of Robert Baratheon, whose reputation as a warrior has come to surpass even Sir Arthur Dayne, your sworn brother. You would like to put that to the test and try your sword against his warhammer, but with your place on the right flank, leading the 10,000 warriors of Dorne, there would be small chance of that. 10,000 spears was all your nephew Prince Doran had sent. You know that the boast of Dorne being able to field an army of 50,000 was just that, a boast, but your careful and calculating nephew should have sent more. With the idiot Mace Tyrell needlessly besieging Storm's End, the royal host is not nearly as strong as it should have been. You are proud to lead your fellow Dornishmen and have no doubt of their quality, but as for the rest of the host, much of it was filled with unblooded peasant boys who had had mere weeks of training before the walls of King's Landing. In truth, you did not wish to be here at all. Your place was in the Red Keep, guarding Elia and her children, as much from the machinations of the royal court as any external threat. You had said as much to the drooling Mad King, who in answer yelled about non-existent Dornish treachery, and ordered you to command this contingent as the only Dornishman he could trust. Yet another in a long line of insults you had borne for the sake of Elia. Even after that, you had swallowed your pride and tried to speak with Rhaegar when he returned from the south, but he had been cold and distant. Part of you wanted to scream at him for kidnapping the Stark girl and starting this damn war. But you didn't, and he went out of his way not to speak with you. And because of your failure to convince them, instead of you, Elia only had Jaime Lannister to protect her and the entire royal family. You liked your youngest sworn brother, and his prowess with the sword was superb, but his family's loyalty was in question. The Lannisters had not marched forth to defend the crown, and that worried you more than you could say. Your countrymen around you are warriors to a man. Doran may have sent less of them than you would have wished, but their quality could not be denied. Trained spearmen, and many knights among them. Some of the men around you are old friends, others new, and you had no doubt they would do House Martell proud. As long as you kept them together and presented a wall of spears, you did not fear the Knights of the Vale, for even an armored destrier would shy away when charging mass spears. You had informed the nobles and knights of this plan, and they had all agreed to maintain the integrity of the line no matter what the cost. Your wing is 1,000 spears across, with 9 ranks behind the front line. A distinct horn blast from the center of the army, where Prince Rhaegar commands, signals that his command to advance would arrive in moments. You turn to your squire, who hands you your white helm, which you place atop your head. He then hands you a Dornish spear and your shield, and before you join the phalanx, you take a few steps forward and turn to your countrymen, thrust your spear into the air, and shout, "For Princess Elia!" In their answer, you hear Dorne, for thousands of spears rhythmically beat against shields. 10,000 cry as one, "Unbowed, unbent, unbroken." The words of House Martell, your words before you had taken the white cloak. You take your place in the center of the front rank, and as you hear the double blast of horns that signal the attack, like a rippling of a cascade of sand across a dune, spears are lowered, and your wing advances to meet the rebel army. 1 hour into the Battle of the Trident. You were locked in pitched battle. Your once gleaming white armor is now painted red and brown from the blood and filth of enemies on the battlefield. Your squire is dead. You had liked the lad, and all you could do was avenge him, and you did when you killed the bastard knight from the Riverlands who cut him down, and finished him with the spear thrust to his left eye. Then, in the following minutes, you had killed the 4 men nearest him, so that none could brag that he had a part in killing the squire of Prince Lewin of Dorne. Since then, the battle has shifted, and you find yourself fighting the men-at-arms of the Vale of Arryn. These are knights who fought on foot in full-plate armor. The Riverlanders had been adequate fighters, but these walking tanks were proving difficult to counter with spears. However, with great effort and commitment to your strategy, the line holds, though your casualties are becoming high. At the blow of a high-pitched flute, the entire line steps to the right to allow the file of men behind you to step forward and take their turn in the front of the line. Out of breath and soaked with sweat, you step back and walk to the middle of the line to assess the battlefield. Seeing you, a page rushes forward and hands you a water skin from which you drink deeply. With the noise and chaos of battle all around you, as best as you can tell, your wing at least is holding strong, and where your spearmen fight the Riverlanders, a breakthrough seems likely. The men of the Riverlands seem completely untrained in facing a Dornish spear wall, and were sore pressed in many places. From your vantage point, you can't tell what is occurring elsewhere on the battlefield. You walk to the rear of your wing and flag down a squire in Targaryen livery. Situation report. How fares Prince Rhaegar? The center is holding, my lord. He cuts off suddenly and looks worried, as if afraid to say something. He looks shaken. You place your blood-spattered armored hand on his shoulder and say, "Tell me." "My lord, it's Robert Baratheon, sir. Prince, men are calling him the demon of the Trident. No one can stand against him. He moves so fast. I've never seen anyone fight like that." You smile at the youth sadly. From his eyes, you know it is more than that. This is the first time the lad has seen men die, or heard the screams of wounded men and horses. For a second, you let your guard down, and let the prince in you look down at the boy and ask, "Have you seen me fight?" The squire shakes his head. "Then watch me, squire, and learn that there is more than one demon on this battlefield." You wink at the lad, then turn, and just like that, you are a Kingsguard again. Your expression grim as you take a fresh spear from a cart of spares kept at the rear of the line and rolled forward by squires as you advance. Then you move to resume your place in the battle line. 2 hours, 18 minutes into the Battle of the Trident. You are kneeling in the mud immediately behind your wing. You are exhausted and have taken a knee while a maester tends your right arm, which is dripping blood from the joints of your armor. You must have been cut far worse than you thought from the lucky strike from a man-at-arms from the Vale wielding a spiked mace. In truth, the pain in your throbbing shoulder and the cramping muscles in your right hand, both strained from the countless thrusts and withdrawals you've done with various spears, is far worse than the so far invisible cut. "My lord, you will need to remove your armor so I can clean and bind the wound properly." "There is no time for that. Bind the arm tightly above the wound. I must return to the battle." Shaking his head, he gives you a leather strap to bite down upon, and then proceeds to tie a leather strip on your upper arm just under your shoulder pauldron. The pain is excruciating, and you are only brought back to your senses by a triumphant roar from the far side of your wing. You attempt to rise to your feet, but this is only achieved with the maester's aid, and when you stand and turn and look, you see the spearmen facing the men of the Riverlands have routed them. But instead of holding the line as ordered, filled with the bloodlust of battle, they are charging after them. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. You yell, "Back, you fools! Hold the line!" It's too late. You feel all too familiar vibrations in the mud come up through your feet and into your legs. Dread fills you, as all the mounted knights of the Vale are charging the gap in your line. Hunter becomes hunted as you witness those spearmen be utterly slaughtered by the charge. 2 hours, 24 minutes into the Battle of the Trident. You only realize that the slaughter you witnessed mere moments ago was conducted by only half the Knights of the Vale, after you had taken a glancing blow from a warlance from behind. When your orders to reform the spear wall were ignored by the now dead spearmen, you had ordered the gap filled from men further down the line. In the chaos of battle, there was confusion, followed by a frantic movement in your lines. Taking advantage of this, the other half of the chivalry of the Vale used the distraction to charge around the tip of your right flank and take your wing in the rear. You struggle to rise. From the agony of merely drawing a short breath, you are sure many of your ribs have been broken. It is only with a titanic effort that you bring yourself to your knees. All around you are armored destriers, on their backs, knights who are dealing death from their great height. Your men fight back valiantly, though devastated by the perfectly executed charge. Their spears give the survivors enough reach to effectively fight the cavalry. You see an unhorsed Vale Knight running towards you, a sword raised above his head, ready to strike. In the mud before you, you search desperately for your sword but cannot find it. Instead, with your left arm, you pick up a broken haft of a spear to wield as a club, your right arm dangling uselessly at your side. Your mind tells your body to react, to move, to listen to your commands, but it won't, it can't, it's broken. Instead, and only with all of your will, you are able to raise the broken spear and attempt to block the incoming strike. Time seems to slow as you notice that the Valeman is a young knight wielding a beautiful sword. You know it, for as a boy you studied and memorized all the Valyrian steel of the great houses. Lady Forlorn comes elegantly, almost majestically down towards you. It slices through your pathetic piece of wood as if it wasn't there, and cuts through your armor and padding on your left side, where your neck meets your body. As your blood flows forth, you lose your sight. In the blackness, you think of another lady and her children, whom you love, whom you have failed, and as your last breath escapes your body, you whisper her name, Elia. At least it might have gone like that. The charge of the Knights of the Vale on the Targaryen right flank was brutal and successful, but not decisive. It failed to rout the Dornish spearmen, who fought on doggedly. Elsewhere, the battle was much the same, a fierce melee and a battle of attrition. Contingents from all over Westeros fought on savagely, believing that their cause was righteous. After hours, and as if the Seven above willed it, Robert Baratheon, Lord of the Stormlands, and Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, were brought together. The two met in single combat, both on war horses, in the middle of the river, while their armies battled all around them. Their duel to the death was long. Rhaegar more than held his own against the demon of the Trident, and wounded Robert badly. In the end, though, proving that the fury was indeed his, Robert slammed his warhammer against Rhaegar's chest with such force that it caved in his plate and crushed the bones beneath it. The hundreds of rubies that had been welded into the prince's black breastplate to form the 300 dragon of his house burst out and went flying through the air. Seeing this, men of both armies dropped their weapons to search the water for the precious gems. Forever after, that place became known as the Ruby Ford. Prince Rhaegar died on his back in the waters of the Trident, and it is said that with his last breath he whispered a name. When word spread that their prince had fallen, the royal army's will to fight crumbled, and all those who could fled the field. Casualties had been high on both sides, but after the rout, the rebels sustained far fewer than the royalists. Robert Baratheon, badly wounded in his duel with the Prince of Dragonstone, required bed rest and was tended to by maesters. As the rebel army took stock and tended its dead and wounded, dire news reached their camp. Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, was marching to the capital with an army 12,000 strong. If they were able to secure and man the walls of King's Landing, the outcome of the rebellion would be very much in doubt. There was still the might of the Reach besieging Storm's End, and the Dornish could send more troops. The war could go on for years. Since he could not lead the army himself, Robert Baratheon put his friend, Lord Eddard Stark, in command of a powerful vanguard, and tasked this force with reaching the capital as quickly as they could. When news of the defeat and the death of Prince Rhaegar reached King's Landing, the Mad King sent his pregnant wife, Queen Rhaella, and their young son, Prince Viserys, away to Dragonstone under the protection of the royal fleet. He kept Princess Elia and her children in the Red Keep as hostages to ensure the continued loyalty of Dorne. As it turned out, Lord Tywin and his army reached the capital first. The King's Council argued as to what to do. Grand Maester Pycelle said that they should open the gates and welcome the aid. The King's Master of Whispers, Lord Varys, advised him that the gates be kept shut until Lord Tywin's intentions were known. The Mad King decided to open the city and welcome the aid of what he thought was his old friend, come to serve him in his most desperate hour. What happened next became known as the sack of King's Landing. When the gates were opened, the Lannister army rushed into the city in a spree of murder, pillage, and rape. At Lord Tywin's order, an elite group of knights stormed the walls of the Red Keep. Within, Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard begged the king to allow him to treat with his father. Instead, the Mad King ordered him to bring him his father's head to prove his loyalty. As he left the throne room, Sir Jaime saw the pyromancer and the new hand of the king, Lord Russart, rush past him, seeking an audience. Sir Jaime waited, and when the hand left the throne room, he killed him. Then the Kingsguard entered the throne room and walked up to the Iron Throne and slew King Aerys, the second of his name, the Mad King. And because of this act, Sir Jaime Lannister was forever after known as the Kingslayer. Elsewhere in the Red Keep, two knights, Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch, sought out and killed Rhaegar's children and raped and murdered Princess Elia. This infamy was rumored to have been ordered by Lord Tywin as a twisted way of proving his loyalty to Robert and the rebellion. During this time period, the lords of the Iron Islands, led by the Greyjoys of Pike, raided the Reach in an attempt to show loyalty to the rebels and, of course, plunder. Though only a minor raid that was quickly beaten back, it should be noted that it resulted in the death of Lord Quelon Greyjoy and the subsequent ascension of his son Balon to the Sea Stone chair, which would later prove to have dire consequences for the realm. Eddard Stark arrived at King's Landing to find the city sacked. An honorable man, he was disgusted by all he saw. Worse was to come, for when Robert Baratheon arrived and was presented the bloody corpses of Rhaegar's children, the two argued over this vile act. Even the calming presence of their foster father, Lord Jon Arryn, could not cool down their tempers. As such, the next day, Lord Stark volunteered to lead a force to lift the siege at Storm's End. Anything to get out of the defiled city. In his absence, Robert was crowned King Robert Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and defender of the realm. Though in truth it would take months of furious diplomacy by his new hand, the Lord Jon Arryn, to heal the wounds the realm had suffered during Robert's rebellion. When the Lord of the North reached Storm's End, he treated with Mace Tyrell, ruler of the Reach, and informed him that the war was over. The siege was lifted peacefully, and when the gates of Storm's End were opened, it was found that the small garrison and Lord Stannis were near starvation, and had only been able to survive thanks to a smuggler who braved the treacherous waters of Shipbreaker Bay and crept through the naval blockade by the Red Wine Fleet. What transpired next is unclear, but Lord Stark took several companions and rode off towards the mountains of Dorne. He found his sister's prison, and his party defeated the 3 Kingsguard knights Rhaegar had stationed there, only to find that his sister was dead. After, he rode south to Starfall, the seat of House Dane, to return their ancestral sword Dawn, that had been wielded by the Kingsguard, Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, who had been at the tower. It is said that the Lady Ashara, who had danced with Oberyn Martell at the tournament at Harrenhal, was driven to madness by grief for the death of her brother. So she threw herself from a high tower and fell into the summer sea, passing on to what comes next. Weeks later, when Eddard Stark returned to the capital, he brought the sad news of the death of his sister Lyanna Stark, who died in that solitary tower in the mountains. The death of the lady, loved by both men, reconciled the two friends, their differences forgotten through their shared grief. In the following months, peace largely returned to the realm. The king was betrothed to the beautiful Cersei Lannister, Lord Tywin's daughter. The Targaryen fleet at Dragonstone was wrecked in a storm, and during that storm, Queen Rhaella gave birth to a baby girl, Daenerys Targaryen, called the Stormborn. The queen died in childbirth. Bereft of hope, the baby and her brother Prince Viserys were taken into exile in Essos by a few loyal retainers. It is said that when Lord Stark rode to Riverrun to escort his lady wife to her new home in the north, she presented him with his heir, a sturdy baby named Robb Stark. In turn, he presented her with his bastard, conceived in a moment of weakness while on campaign. That bastard's name was Jon Snow. Before we go, if you enjoy Song of Ice and Fire as much as I do, there are a number of wonderful creators who add so much to the fandom that I would like to recognize, because not only do I listen to them, I consider them my friends. Of course, Yolkboy and Lady Gwennifer from the wonderful Radio Westeros, the boys over at Davos Fingers, and Aziz and Ashaya at History of Westeros. Thank you for listening to Deep into History. I hope you enjoyed The Stag and the Dragon. Please suggest it to your friends as a worthy prequel to the HBO series Game of Thrones. To support the show for just 10 cents a day, please go to patreon.com/deepintohistory. You can follow me at Deep Into History on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok to get your daily blast from the past. And as always, my dear friend, take care of yourself. I truly look forward to the next time we go deep